this video, we talk about something known as the Laffer curve, named after Arthur B. Laffer, who was the economic policy advisor in the Reagan's administration. And the Laffer curve explores the relationship between the tax revenue and the tax rates. So let's just consider two cases. Case one, we have the total amount of taxes equaling to the tax rate times the total amount of income. Suppose we assume that we cut taxes by 5%. So if the tax rate goes down by 5%, the idea of supply side believers or the supply side economists is that because of cutting taxes of 5%, the GDP in fact would rise by say 7%. And as a result, because the GDP goes up proportionally more than the cut in taxes, the net product of the two would mean an increase in tax revenue by 2%. So in spite of a cut in taxes or the cut in tax rate, the total tax revenue collected by the government goes up because of the higher impact on GDP. And the second case would be you cut taxes by the same 5%, but the increase in GDP is about, say, 4%. As a result of this cutting tax rate of 5% and increase of GDP of 4%, the overall tax revenue collected by the government would go down by 1%. So over here, a cut in taxes leads to a drop in tax revenue. So the government will be collecting less taxes. But over here, if you cut the income tax rate, the amount of tax revenue collected by the government goes up. So this is the idea behind supply side policies, is that a cut in tax rate leads to a higher amount of tax revenue collected by the government, and the reason being there is a higher impact on the GDP. So overall, in the net, the tax revenue goes up. Let's get this idea in terms of a graph which is known as the Laffer curve. So on the horizontal axis, I have the little t, which is representing the tax rate, and on the vertical axis, I have the big T, which is the total amount of tax revenue collected by the government. And the Laffer curve shows the relationship between the total tax revenue collected by the government and the amount of tax rate. And this Laffer curve captures both the cases that we talked about, is that when you are to the left of this Laffer curve, if you cut taxes, the tax revenue would go down. Right? So a cut in tax rate would lead to a drop in tax revenue. This is the second case that we talked about. And the idea of the supply side policies or the supply side economists is that if you are on to the right of the Laffer curve, then at that point when you cut the tax rate, you would in fact be increasing the amount of tax revenue collected by the government. So the supply siders believe that the economy is more in the higher tax brackets, which is of course not free of criticism. It's more likely, and in fact it has been shown that US is one of the developed countries where the tax rates is lower compared to say UK maybe standing here, or maybe France, which is having a higher tax rate compared to US and UK is in the 80s. So if this is the fact, that a cut in tax rate in US would mean a less amount of tax revenue collected by the government. And hence, this is one of the main principal criticisms of the Laffer and its supporters who were in the Reagan administration in the 80s, that it is not the case that US is on the right-hand side or on the higher side of the tax rates, but is in fact on the left-hand side or on the lower side of the tax rate. And as a result, it was shown that when the Reagan did tax cut, the budget deficit in fact went up, or the government collected less revenue.